On the morning of the 1st of June, 11 days before the opening match of the 2026 World Cup, a chartered flight sat on the ground at OR Tambo International Airport in Johannesburg. It was supposed to carry the South African national team, Bafana Bafana, on the first leg of their journey to Mexico City, where they were scheduled to face the host nation in the tournament's opening match on the 11th of June. The bags were packed, the preparation had been done, the players and the coaching staff were ready to travel. And then they weren't, because the visas hadn't come through. Not American visas, Mexican visas, for the team playing the opening match of the World Cup in Mexico City. A chartered flight, booked and paid for, sitting on a runway in Johannesburg while the administrative machinery of international travel failed to produce the documents required to let a qualified World Cup nation board it. South Africa's sports minister found out the same way the public did, through a statement from the federation issued that Sunday morning, explaining that the group could not travel as originally planned. His response was immediate and unambiguous. He posted publicly that the situation was embarrassing and grossly unfair toward the players and coaching staff, that his country was being made to look like fools, that he needed a report and that action must be taken against those responsible. We are being made to look like fools. That is not the language of a diplomatic communique. That is a sports minister saying in plain terms that a qualified World Cup nation, a nation that last hosted the World Cup itself in 2010, a nation with a genuine football history, had been placed in a position of public embarrassment 11 days before the most significant football match it would play in 16 years. And the embarrassment wasn't incidental. It wasn't a minor administrative delay that resolved itself quietly. It was a public, documented, internationally reported episode in which the team preparing to appear in the World Cup's opening match couldn't get on their plane. The resolution, when it came, was functional. The visas were eventually processed. The squad eventually departed. South Africa eventually arrived in Mexico City and prepared for the match. But the episode, the grounded flight, the minister's public statement, the international attention it drew in the days leading into the tournament, left a mark. And it sits within a much larger picture of travel and logistics failures that have surrounded this tournament with a frequency and visibility that the governing body and the primary host nation have struggled to manage. Because South Africa's situation was not unique. It was, as one report put it precisely, the latest squad to face challenges traveling to North America for the expanded 48-team World Cup. The latest, not the only, not an isolated case. The latest in a series of qualified nations for whom the process of arriving at a tournament they had earned the right to attend turned out to be more complicated than it should have been. Iran's situation has been the most extensively documented and the most dramatically resolved. Their players arrived in Tijuana on the 7th of June, today as this script was written, to begin preparations for a group stage in which they'll play their matches in Los Angeles and Seattle, crossing the American border on match days before returning to Mexican soil. The Football Federation's vice president confirmed that administrative work on visas for players traveling into the United States was still in progress as late as the weekend before the tournament. An Iranian squad preparing for a World Cup, still waiting for administrative confirmation of their ability to enter the primary host country less than a week before their first fixture. Not because of any failure on their part, because of the particular complexity of a geopolitical situation that turned their preparation into something no other nation in the tournament has had to navigate. Now, here's where things get more complex, because both the South Africa and Iran travel stories are expressions of the same underlying problem, a problem that has been visible throughout this tournament's preparation and that the primary host nation has not resolved, despite years of planning time. The 2026 World Cup is hosted by the United States, Canada, and Mexico together. But the entry requirements, visa structures, and administrative processes for each of those three countries operate separately. A team that needs to travel between all three host nations, as South Africa does, playing in Mexico City, Atlanta, and Monterrey, needs to navigate three distinct bureaucratic systems. A team whose home country has a complicated diplomatic relationship with one or more of the host nations faces the additional weight of that relationship being played out through the visa application process. South Africa needed Mexican visas for their opening match and American visas for their second match against Czechia in Atlanta. The Mexican visa situation stranded them in Johannesburg. The American visa requirement was its own separate process, one that at the point their Mexican visa situation was unresolved was also still being worked through. A qualifying nation in the opening week of June, navigating two separate visa processes for two different host nations while a minister posted publicly about being made to look like fools. That is the operational reality of a three-hosted World Cup that was presented to the world as the most inclusive, most expansive, most welcoming in the competition's history.
The coach dimension of this script's title refers to something different and something that resonates specifically with the United States' own World Cup campaign. Because the story of the American national team's coaching situation in the build-up to this tournament has been one of the more quietly extraordinary subplots of the entire preparation. Mauricio Pochettino was appointed as the team's head coach and oversaw the qualifying campaign. He confirmed his squad, he prepared his team, and then, in the weeks before the tournament, questions circulated, some persistent, some pointed, about the certainty of his position going forward and about the relationship between the coach and the federation above him. Those questions were not the product of poor results. They were the product of an institutional dynamic that had been difficult to manage publicly and that added an unnecessary layer of noise to the preparation of the host nation's team at the moment when clarity was most needed. Pochettino himself spoke about the situation with the kind of measured frustration of a professional who has managed these dynamics before. He has navigated complicated institutional relationships at clubs throughout his career, at Southampton, at Tottenham, at Chelsea, at Paris Saint-Germain. He knows what it feels like when the ground beneath a management position is less stable than the public language around it suggests. And in the weeks before the United States' opening match against Paraguay at SoFi Stadium in Los Angeles, one of the most spectacular venues ever built, before what was supposed to be a full crowd of a nation invested in the outcome, a generation of American players, Christian Pulisic, Tyler Adams, Weston McKennie, Gio Reyna, have been building toward exactly this moment, the home World Cup. The chance to do what the 1994 team could not just host a successful tournament, but perform in one that the country could rally behind. The conditions for that story to be told were all there. And yet, weeks before the opening match, fewer than 41,000 tickets had been sold for SoFi Stadium, a venue with a capacity approaching 70,000. A coaching situation generating institutional noise at the worst possible moment. A tournament whose surrounding context, the empty seats in Dallas, the canceled fan festival in New Jersey, the travel barriers for international supporters, the legal subpoenas from state attorneys general, had made the promotional narrative of a triumphant home World Cup considerably more difficult to sustain than anyone in the federation had planned for. Here is the bigger issue. The South Africa visa story, the grounded flight, the minister's public statement, the last-minute resolution, is a metaphor for something that runs through this entire tournament's preparation. The gap between what was promised and what was delivered. The gap between the promotional language of the most inclusive World Cup history and the operational reality facing teams, supporters, and communities trying to participate in it. South Africa couldn't board their flight because a visa process failed. Iran is sleeping in Mexico and crossing a border on match days because the primary host and a qualified nation are at war. Fans from 39 countries face barriers to attending matches on American soil. A father in Alabama couldn't afford to take his 4 children to see the host nation play. Each of those situations has its own specific cause.
The South Africa visa delay involves administrative failure at a federation level, a multi-country hosting structure that created bureaucratic complexity, and a timeline that didn't leave enough margin for error. Iran's situation involves geopolitics that no sporting calendar was designed to accommodate. The fan access issues involve policy decisions made at a governmental level that the governing body has neither the authority nor apparently the inclination to directly challenge. The ticket pricing issue involves commercial decisions made by an institution whose revenues will be historically large, regardless of how many seats in Dallas are filled.
But what connects all of them is that they are all failures of preparation, not of the football. The football is not the problem. The football is what it always is, played by people who have dedicated their professional lives to performing at this level, indifferent to the administrative noise around them. South Africa's players prepared as well as they could given their disrupted travel schedule. Iran's players arrived in Tijuana and went to work. The American players will walk out at SoFi Stadium against Paraguay and play for their country in the way players always do. The historical comparison that matters here is 1994. The United States hosted the World Cup for the first time 32 years ago and produced a tournament that surprised almost everyone with its organization, its crowds, and its atmosphere. The lesson of 1994 was that preparation and institutional commitment can overcome skepticism. But the preparation of 1994 did not involve a team playing in the opening match being stranded at their departure airport 11 days before the fixture. It did not involve a qualified nation's players waiting on visa confirmation in the week before their first match. It did not involve the host nation's coach facing questions about the stability of his position as his team prepared to open the competition. The South Africa episode resolved itself. The flight departed, the squad arrived, the match will be played in Mexico City on the 11th of June, and one of football's most storied partnerships, the Azteca, the opening match, the roar of 83,000 people, will happen regardless of what preceded it. But the episode is recorded. The minister's words are documented. The image of a World Cup opening match team unable to depart for their destination on the morning they were supposed to fly is not an image that disappears because the resolution eventually arrived. What do you think the moment communicates? Not about South Africa, whose players and staff were the victims of an administrative failure they didn't cause and couldn't control, but about the structure of the tournament that produced it. A three-nation co-hosting arrangement of extraordinary ambition that, in some of its most basic operational dimensions, did not work as smoothly as it needed to. A primary host nation that is simultaneously managing legal investigations into its ticketing practices, empty upper tiers in its stadiums, the geopolitical consequences of hosting a nation it is at war with, and questions about the stability of its own team's coaching position. And a tournament that, for all of this, is about to begin, and will, in the way football always does, produce moments of genuine beauty that remind everyone watching why they came in the first place. Whether the operational failures of the preparation phase are remembered alongside those moments, or whether the football buries them completely, is the question the next 6 weeks will answer. The opening match in Mexico City will be extraordinary. The Azteca, South Africa, Mexico, 83,000 people. Shakira at the ceremony, the third time this stadium has hosted a World Cup opener across 6 decades of history. It will be what the World Cup always is when it finally arrives, and the grounded plane in Johannesburg will become a footnote, unless there are more footnotes still to come.